Hi, my name is Ken Assenson. I wrote the Microbiome prescription website. Today we're going to do a walkthrough of a post that goes up today also. And it is a type of post I actually like to do because the website deals with theoretical models. And the question, of course, is, do they work or don't they work? So when somebody asked me to do a walkthrough and posted the blog, etc., and they go off and they go and try things, and in some cases I don't hear anything back. Often I do hear things back and generally positive, but it's nice when they do another sample and I can come back and see how well the model performs. I expect some disasters occasionally, but I expect most of the time improvement, and that comes back to the criteria I keep saying is my goal is to improve the odds. I don't intend to cure everybody. I just trying to improve the odds of reducing symptoms and them getting better. Okay, so what we have here is a follow-up post to this earlier one, which is, you can see on the side, which is right here. Description, etc. This one, actually, doing it was a bit of angst for me. And the reason you'll find out when we go back is that there was nothing really sticking out in the microbiome. I mean, I had to literally dig to find suggestions for him. There's nothing sticking out, which is, in some cases, reality. Somebody has symptoms, the microbiome doesn't show anything clear, and you have to go and do a little bit of a hunting to find out what could possibly help. So let's go back and take a look at the thing. The first thing, looking at the sample, is the prior sample had 427 bacteria. Reported new one has 591, a 38% in terms of number of bacteria. Generally, the more difference of bacteria you have, the healthier it is generally perceived. That's conventional wisdom. In this case, the lab they did, which was on the side UK, the typical number is about 588. So roughly he went from below the usual number of bacteria being reported up to about the average number. So it's in some ways an improvement. He did not have a sparsity of bacteria types. Rather, he started having more mixed population. So now let's take a look at the next. The next item is using the health status. You'll see the page it comes from a bit later. Basically, he had 1 healthy bacteria and 8 unhealthy before, and now he actually went up. He ended up with 9 unhealthy bacteria. Not necessarily what you want to see, but it does happen. Then we go on to Jason Harwick's recommendation. The simplest way of expressing is that he used to be at a 99% percentile, way better than most people, and he dropped down to 97. And down below is we see what went down. But in general, we have 2 things going up. We had 2 things went down into normal range, and then 1 item is still not ideal, but it went closer to ideal. So in general, almost a wash, but a slight improvement using those criteria. Now, where we suddenly see a major difference is in the bacteria identified to be unhealthy. We saw decrease, drop off list, decrease, etc. In other words, the unhealthy bacteria went down, despite the fact that the number of bacteria went up, which is generally, I view as a positive situation. Now, next thing I went through, because nowadays it's far easier to do it, is I just went through and clicked using a variety of criteria, and click through and record a number. And as you see, same number shows up all in a bunch up. And what that simply means is that these different criteria, with some cases 15, some cases 65 or times more, ends up picking the same bacteria, and the rest of the bacteria, it says, are fine or ignored. So no major things there. When we got down to standard lab ranges, we actually had less out of that range. And where we ended up having some changes is box whiskers about the same, cutoff mold trap about the same, and we had a jump in terms of percentiles in the top and bottom. In other words, the number of bacteria increases by about 38%, and the number of bacteria in the top and bottom increased by 38%. So in some ways, it's sort of not unexpected, but all the new bacteria, and now these have the same jump. It means that the new bacteria are dominantly called normal bacteria, not unhealthy bacteria, which is a good sign. The percentile, we see the jump. No place else we see that 38% jump, which one would expect to see with a 38% jump in terms of the number of bacteria. Now, so basically we have that. Okay, symptom change went back and forth, but basically he indicated a bunch of changes. He has a good long list of symptoms, but basically there were 4 symptoms which made to him, which were significant changes, which is good, especially for a 33-year-old male having a bit of libido. It's okay, sorry ladies, but it's a good sign there. Now, as an aside, I am working on, but it's not up there, using the regression on symptoms to make forecasts based on the enzymes, and I applied it to his samples, the 2 of them, and basically currently we have 154 of the predictions of symptoms. The odds prediction were improved odds for not having, or I should say more correctly, the odds of him having any one of a list of 290 items decreased for 74%, which to me I view as okay. That is a pretty strong movement in the right direction. Normally you would expect, okay, some goes up, some goes down. You would expect perhaps 50%, but we are way up to 74%. So that is good. Basically, overall appears to be improved. Next round of suggestion was what we could look at next. After he did a sample, started 10 days of doxycycline and started to take rosemary, and he mentions in his emails that he feels pretty good taking it. So in other words, it seems to have actually visible or emotional positive results, which is a good aspect. So now let's go on to the next. Okay, now probiotics, we now have a lot more different ways of picking them. Sometimes the suggestion probiotics will agree. Generally they will, fortunately. Sometimes there's some disagreement, and it's because we are doing different mechanisms. For example, one, we are looking at the DNA of your microbiome samples and the DNA of the probiotic species. Another case, we are dealing with clinical studies which try probiotic and report some things shift, certain types of bacteria shift, and that depends on significance level, and a whole bunch of other things. So when you're dealing with clinical studies, you're dealing with a general population. When you're dealing with the DNA, you're actually being very specific, very targeted, very focused. So we have a variety of ways there. There's this blog post which goes through the details of the different methods. So I went and ran back and forth and calculated 2 of them. And what we have is we have 2 very different lists. The old samples, we had practically nothing that stuck out as a probiotic to take. With the latest sample, suddenly the numbers went sky high. And the number are there, and actually the numbers here are far more typical of somebody with chronic fatigue syndrome than the ones here. He had mild chronic fatigue syndrome, but at the same time his microbiome seemed to have gone up into a little private niche corner where he was atypical for his microbiome shift. Now he seems to have moved back into closer to what is seen with chronic fatigue syndrome and IBS. So what we end up doing is going to the second way. This one which was done without making use of his symptoms. So in other words, it was just sort of broad shotgun. We now have the ability to focus. So we look at the symptoms, look at the enzymes which are connected to the symptoms, and from that we go and we calculate which probiotics will help with the deficiency which are connected to the symptoms. In other words, we're sort of doing much more focused one, and what we end up with, surprisingly or rather delightfully, is we have a very similar set of things. And what we also notice is the weighting factor for how much impact it will do. You notice it went from 34 to 22, from 4.4 to 3.5. Every single one, the weight went down. In other words, it is not needed as much as it was in the prior sample. Interpretation, it means that his microbiome has improved, so he doesn't need as much. He's still short, but not as short as he used to be. So then we went over into getting suggestions, and I basically just slugged straight through doing the design consensus, get the results, etc., and we'll show them. And then we end up going back in, and because he is in a fortunate situation of being able to persuade a medical professional to prescribe stuff, which most people unfortunately are not, he has got on doxycycline, and the question is what other prescription drugs are there, and what we end up doing is getting a list of suggestions there of things which he may want to consider talking with. One of them has been used with positive results for chronic fatigue syndrome, and happens to be one pretty much close to the top, which sort of confirms that the mechanism of action is the action against the microbiome shifts. So now I shipped this post over to him for a review, came back, and he had done a very reasonable thing. He went and took his samples and applied the MACFS filter to it, and you can see how it's done. I got very different results, which sort of confused. Okay, I ended up explaining to him, look, you have mild MACFS, and the studies on the U.S. National Library of Medicine are for people who are typically severe and matches a yard of criteria in order to get included in the study. So often when you are self-diagnosed or you have a mild controlled case of a condition, it is not necessarily safe to trust those filtering criteria. And in fact, we go into one step further. I went through all the choices before for filtering, and what you see here is you see that the filtering dropped down the number of bacteria considerably, dropped it from 6 to 4, from 25 to 5. In other words, that's 75% drop almost. 84 to 12, 99 to 8. That's 92% exclusion of bacteria. 92% bacteria which would normally be looked at, you're not looking at it because of that filter. And when you get down to this type of numbers, I say, okay, no, it is too focused. You are trying to nail the kingpins alone without looking at the second in command with the whole infrastructure. So the whole result is you could get there, but you may not get there as fast. So my usual criteria in the past has been trying to get 1 to 2 bacteria in the selection list, and we only had 1 coming up to 12. Everyone else was well below the 1 dozen mark. And using a new consensus report, which you'll see in a few moments, we can handle far more number of bacteria without really impacting the nature of our results, and you just get a greater confidence of selecting things which have the better odds. Again, we're dealing with probability, we're dealing with statistics, we're not dealing with the gospel of fixing your microbiome. Just believe the substance and we'll do it. I don't know what the magic answer is. All I can do is, using artificial intelligence statistics, calculate what has improved odds of helping you. And in general, the results has been, it helps people. It doesn't cure them, but it does help them. It reduces the symptoms or the symptom severity, which is a first step of what can be a long step. I've been through it myself and basically got into full remission, but it took time. I have lots of microbiome samples. Okay, so down here is a quick summary. So at this point in time, let's go over and walk through the physical steps to do this type of review. Okay, before us we have the personal samples, and this is one he just did, which is the results came back in March. The one in December, so the earlier blog post, which I did for him, he went and applied for about 3 months, then did resampling, and that is the result. Now, first thing I'm going to do is, first thing you should do is when you go on, you don't want to have public, because if you have public, a whole bunch of things may disappear here. And I'm going to first do a clear here, and I'll just clean up the screen a little bit. Consensus suggestions are accumulation of all sets of suggestions which you have done, and if you want to start fresh, just clear them and they are gone. Otherwise, I think they stay around for something like 24 hours so that you can come back to them, but it doesn't clog up my database storage. Okay, so we go in here and we go up and we change it up to actually, let's just go in normal. These symptoms with expert thing. We're in there, and the first thing you want to do is check to make sure you have there. See, there was a bug which I will fix, which should have gone and picked the right one. It didn't. And then you have all the choices. We already know the results of all of these are the same item. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do the bottom 4. We're going to just click here, get suggestion, goes over there. We don't even need to look at suggestions because the consensus report will take all of them together. We do box whisker, same thing. Cut off malt drop, same thing. Next one, I'm going to go with the default. You could increase or decrease it for whatever philosophical reasons you want. Do it. I don't care. I basically don't care. All it is, it gives you more things. So we have done 4 separate methods. When we go back here, we see we have 4 consensus suggestions. Isn't that sweet? Already done for us. Now, we can do a list of there which says, okay, how long ago we did each one. As you can see, number of suggestions range from 300 to almost 500 different suggestions, as in suggestions for or suggestions against. So we have a pretty rich set of collections of items, far more than you typically will get back from if you get suggestions from the labs. And now what we do is we're going to do a view consensus. And now we have the consensus in front of you. And this table again allows you to sort by anything. And as a suggestion is you want to go and hit 0 there. In fact, Safest Tech has 0 all the way there. You probably want to hit here because you want ones which every single one says take it. So what we have here is there, and now what I'm going to do is going to do one more there so that we have the zeros here and zeros here. And what we have is a beautiful list of items which it has positive impact with no adverse risk, and every single way of looking at it came up with the same result. We could go and do something like filtering and by food, and thereby we see a whole bunch of things in terms of caffeine, good. This person is Scandinavia, so caffeine. He's probably like me, medical alert in case of blood loss. Just start putting Starbucks into the veins, and he will be happy. Caramel, caraway seeds, etc. Cumin, coffee, and caffeine are both listed there with the positive impact. We could click this again and see the ones which are the biggest impact. In some cases, you have to take a look at it. We have about 2.5 to 1 ratio here for walnut, so in general it's good. We have a 22 to 1 here for cacao. If you do chocolate bars, go for 85% or higher chocolate bar. We have soy. The ratio isn't quite as good, so it's not the best choice. It's a valid choice, but it's not the best choice. So if soy is in the diet already, no problem. If it's not, there's not a compelling reason to put it in. We have things like green tea, another one. Again, that's probably because of the caffeine dimension of it. We have black raspberry, we have whey coming in, but the ratio for whey is not, again, not great. And if ratio not great, it's sort of okay, if you're already doing it, it seems helpful, keep doing it. But there's not a great motivation to include it. Lauric acid, again, as a product called monolaurin, and it's a good ratio, etc. So you go through there, and we have how many items? We have 118 full items. So what we could do is jack it up to show all of them, and now we have a long list, and we can do it. And let's try doing it there. So we have there, and now we get down, and everything is favorable. All of them are sort of same number, which means they probably act somewhat the same mechanism. So we have a whole bunch of food choices, which are probably, you can do this, or you can do that, you can do this, or you can do that. Doesn't really make much difference which ones you do. And then we have a few items which have a little bit of compound thing. For example, alcohol, in theory, would improve it, but the ratio is only about 2.5 ratio, which means there's some risk to it, and you want to have the strongest ratio possible. Ideally, something to 0 gives you the best results. You can now go down and see things which are at highest adverse risk. Go down here, and again we have all 4s and 0s. And what you may want to do is take a look at them and take a look at things to avoid, like xylene, stevia, tryptophan, quercetin, nuts, other things all have a negative risk. Again, if you're taking some of them for other reasons, there may not be a good reason to stop it, but it means that if you can avoid it, it's probably beneficial to avoid it. And as you see, we have 122 items listed there. And then you go through, so you go through, what do we have, 500, 600 items. Select out the items which are to your taste, to your menu, to what your diet is. Be aware of things which are negative, things you want to take out of your diet, herbs and spices. So it's basically just going through that whole process that way. So that is the consensus report. In this case, you get a walloping big number of suggestions, or at least this person gets you. And most people will get a pretty good number of suggestions. You get ones with very high value, and the value again means this is based on the fact that there's a lot of studies showing a positive impact for the bacteria you're trying to change. The higher the value generally means the more studies. The more studies, the more likely the study is correct for the general case, for the person in general. So that's it. Now, to flip back to a couple other things, I'm going to jack that up to intermediate. I'm going to go down here, and we have clinic suggested probiotics, and this is calculating them without paying attention to symptoms. As you see, we get reasoning said we get some pretty good sized numbers there. But if you go back, we also have underneath symptoms, we have probiotics based on symptoms. It uses similar mechanism. And now it comes back and you can see what the weight is, how many species, the enzyme means there. One of the things about probiotics is, remember, these are suggestions. You do not need to take it, simply increase your odds. For example, the prescription assist in Europe could be hard to come by, and it could be very expensive. Whereas something like this one, which is a probiotic consisting of 5 species there, so I just open it, and there we see all the different species in it. It tends to have a pretty good impact. And now we have other things, and some of these are single one of these 5 species, so they don't have quite as much impact there. And then we go down, and lots of things have the same number, which often means if you click here, they have the identical same species of bacteria in them. So any of them can do it. And then down, and then we have other things, etc. So that's basically second way of it. The third way is to go back to a specific sample, and I'm going to go to do advanced suggestion. That's your Kaltoff Maltrap, and open suggestions in a new window. And it did. Unfortunately, the window was in, should be a new tab. And there we have here, and then down below we have the commercial probiotic suggestions. Things there. We have things with negative, and then we have mixed impact. This is based on clinical studies on populations, so it is less precise, less targeted than using the DNA, but it is an alternative way of trying to calculate out what the best probiotics are. And ones which have no known impact. In other words, these are, take them or don't take them, really doesn't matter too much. I see I have one typo. General Biotics Equilibrium and the Prescription Assist are similar style of products. And I think it's interesting that one shows up and one didn't show up on a suggestion, but it's not particularly of importance. Again, I don't give you a one simple this, just follow and do it. I give you information, and you have to do balancing, whatever. My own preference, because conceptually, in terms of modeling, it is the best is make sure you enter your symptoms, keyword. It won't work if you don't have symptoms in there. And probiotics based on symptoms, and voila. And the reason I prefer this is it's working off the DNA of your bacteria, working off the DNA of the probiotics, and it's working off binary logistic regression, symptoms to enzymes analysis, which seems to be a reasonably good predictor. So it's sort of, okay, much heavier on the mathematics of how we get to it, but it's also less fuzziness in terms of how we come to it. We are dealing with a restricted set of information, which is far more person-specific than the other ways of simply asking for suggestion, which uses general population data and does the best it can with that. So And also it doesn't deal with food. It deals with food and a whole bunch of other things. So it's wider, but it's also dealing with the general population. This is dealing with probiotics alone, and it's basically working at the DNA level, trying to come up with the magical solution. So, okay, I think that's about it.